With the new ban list being released in Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, what are the best decks? Hello guys and welcome back to another cold episode, and happy Thanksgiving to those in America. On today's episode, we are going to be going over all of the top decks and what are going to be the best decks moving forward in the new environment with the new ban list, etc, etc. So, yeah, there hasn't really been any new cards released, but there was the new ban list, which, well, we'll get into that when we actually talk about the decks. So yeah, let's just start off with Branded here, which I believe is solidly right in the middle of top tier. We're going to put it in tier 1.5. Also, I should preface, all of these will be for the ladder, for Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel ladder, and not specifically for tournaments or anything like that with a best of 3 or something along those lines. The problem with that is that a lot of tournaments run in very different ways, so it's really difficult to determine what those are, and it doesn't really help you to climb Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel's ladder. So, here you go. Branded is good. Branded is really solid right now. It has the ability to play through a lot of different things, and Bystials are better now, mostly due to the fact that Mathmech is a lot better as well, which means that if you're able to destroy Mathmech with a single Bystial, that makes it a lot stronger. Although destroying Mathmech with a Bystial isn't really something that you can do. You kind of can because the... anyway, so Bystials are better, and therefore Branded is better, but it honestly is always just pretty good. Kind of high roll, kind of not. It can play through quite a bit as well, which is pretty interesting. Code Talker. We're going to talk about a few variants of cyberse pile, and Code Talker is still pretty good. Code Talker is one of the worse versions of cyberse pile, but it still has the ability to end on like Signet Codex, not Signet Codex. Signet Conflict, as well as a few other interactions. You can still play the Mathmech stuff as well, which makes it still very strong, and because of that, cyberse is just absurd. Let's actually talk about all of the cyberse stuff right now. We're going to grab Mathmech. I think there's one more. I think Adagnister it should be in here somewhere. I'm probably just missing it. Is it really not in here? That's wild. Or I'm just blind. One of the two. No, I genuinely can't see it. That's weird. Yeah, okay. Then we'll just talk about Mathmech. Mathmech's one... I don't... Do I put in... Yeah. Mathmech, yes, technically did get Diameter put to 1, and it also got Signet Mining put to 2, but the problem is that doesn't really do anything. Now you're going from 12 starters or 12 ways to see the Mathmech Circular to 11. It's really not that big of a deal. It basically changes nothing, and Mathmech Circular still does basically everything that you need it to. Diameter also being put to 1 kind of doesn't matter. Most of the time you're only using it at 1 anyway. The biggest thing is like now if you were to banish it off of like a called by or a crossout, or not a crossout, a Bystial, like they're not getting it back, but honestly that doesn't really matter with the amount of extension that cyberse has. They're still able to basically play the game. So yeah, they're still basically the best deck. Heroes are forever rogue. They're fine. If they get to actually play the game and set up their 3 floodgates, they win the game. If they don't, they lose the game. It's pretty simple. I don't really have anything to say about this. Dark World is pretty bad. Same with DDD. Dynamorphia is slightly better. Dynamorphia doesn't really do a whole lot in general. It's very high roll, where it's like, yeah, if Rexstrom is able to hit the field and the opponent doesn't really have anything like an imperm to negate it or anything along those lines to really interact with it, then yeah, it's fine, but you still have to get there, and you also can't have anything that your opponent would be able to, like, I don't know. It's very specific, and it's like you need to see very specific cards. If you don't see one of the 2 fusion traps, you just kind of die. Like, you don't really have much to do. And you die to, like, Ash Blossom as well, which is not great. Draco Slayer is pretty bad. Mathmech exists, or not Mathmech, Maxi exists, and that really does hurt the deck. On top of that, you're basically high rolling with Pendulum, which isn't great, because that means all of your, like, going second tools just are Pendulum cards, which are very easy to counter. So yeah. Drytron's fine. They still have access to Ava. I think Ben 10 just went to 3 more recently. I think the deck's just boring, and so that's why most people don't play it. It's boring to play against. It's not really exceptional to play, and it's not like the most fun thing. I don't know. I haven't played it, so never mind. I shouldn't be saying anything about that. But all in all, I think that the deck doesn't really do a whole lot right now. With like, Droplet being good again, with Dark Ruler No More also being good, with Kaijus being almost everywhere. There's just not really like a good option for this deck, and you could potentially do like Floodgate stuff, but that's pretty inconsistent. Endymion is fine. It's better than Draco Slayer, but not by much. Pendulums just aren't really great right now. Evil Eye's not great. Exosister, if they end up seeing like a really, really good hand, maybe they're good. But for the most part, I don't really feel like they're all that great. I'm actually going to move like literally everything down. Endymion can stay. Yeah, the biggest problem with Exo is just their plays aren't really all that great right now. Being able to banish is nice, for sure. But again, they just die to a Kaiju, right? If you Kaiju them, they just kind of can't do anything, right? They're also not great into like Imperm or Ash Blossom or stuff like that. And Dimension Shifter right now is pretty mid. So even if they do resolve Dimension Shifter, it's not great. And there's not really a good matchup for them right now. Like, there's a few that are okay, but not great. Pearly's still the best deck. Yes, post Banlist, they did lose 2 cards, but they lost 2 cards. The biggest difference is that now off of My Friend Pearly, they can't get guaranteed access to Delicious Memory, but it's still more likely that they reveal a Delicious Memory than not, and having access to 2 of it means that they're also still likely to draw it, which means that they're still able to see the Delicious Memory quite often. Yeah, it does mean that they're going to see it less often, but honestly, that's not really that big of a deal. Yeah, moving on. Flu is actually, it's kind of bad, mostly due to consistency. They basically can't play half of their deck, so hooray. And they just keep getting more and more cards hit. Runic for Hire Sprite did lose 1 fountain. I don't think that matters too much with that build in particular. Yes, it means that like you're less likely to see the fountain, which does matter in terms of like drawing 6 and starting your advantage engine. But I really don't think that was the reason the deck was good. Yeah, even without fountain, I think you're still able to generate enough advantage to more or less play the game. So, I'm still going to put it in tier 2. Goatee's just not great right now. Banishing cards is kind of mid, and they're really inconsistent. Evagishki or Gishki Sprite is just not great. I think there are just significantly better Sprite variants, like for example this one. It just kind of, like, yes, being able to tribute your opponent's monsters for the cost of your ritual summon is nice, but honestly, with the amount of extension that a lot of decks have, and the amount of hand traps and stuff like that, yeah, it's just not great. Yeah, that's more or less it. Novels are bad. I don't really have anything else to say. Same with Infernoble. Kashtira is still pretty good, but not insane by any stretch of the imagination. Yeah, it's probably tier 2. The main reason for it is, again, consistency. If you're trying to win games to climb on the ladder, it is pretty difficult if your deck doesn't do that consistently, like doesn't have a game plan that it can do consistently. If Kashtira plays the game, it's great. The problem is it can also be broken by just about every other board, right? Like even Branded has a pretty decent time breaking that board, right? Things like Triple Tactics Talents is still very good in the meta and is good against that deck. Things like Herald of the Abyss, etc. Still very strong, so this is just kind of in a weaker spot right now. Labyrinth is probably the second best deck right now. Pearly didn't really receive enough hits to really shake up the meta. I still think the top 3 decks are the top 3 decks prior to the ban list. So, yeah. Stovey Torby going to 2 doesn't really matter. It does matter a little for consistency, but not really much. And with how hard Labyrinth can win its games, it makes it a lot stronger. But Dolce's not great. Same with Megalith. Megalith is so terrible. Same with Mermail. Makonko's still pretty decent. They can just kind of steal games. I don't really have anything else to say. I think with people getting better at playing against Makonko, the deck has become worse. But all in all, it's still like a decent deck. It wins games. Runic Naturia did receive quite a hit. I probably would have put this higher. But Runic is really important for that list. Because being able to, like, specifically being able to search out a Runic Fountain to, like, pitch the trap cards to the graveyard does matter. Which means that now if, like, you get ashed, you're a lot less likely to already have the fountain to generate that additional advantage. And I do think that that matters a lot more in Runic Naturia, where, like, the whole point of it is just generating more advantage than your opponent and not necessarily, like, putting on pressure with, like, Omni Negates and stuff like that. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say. I think the Sprite stuff is just a little bit stronger than the Naturia stuff. That I think the Runic stuff carried this deck a little bit more. And so I think it gets a little bit worse than the For Hire stuff. That may be my bias, but I honestly feel like the Runic hit mattered more for this deck. So I'm going to put it a little bit lower than the For Hire stuff. Ninjas... Ninjas aren't great. Pendulum Magician is... Do I really put them in tier 2? Pendulum Magician is probably the best of the Pendulum decks, but that's not really saying much because there's not really a high bar for that. Going first, they're really, really good and can basically make an unbreakable board pretty consistently. The problem is going second. They kind of just die going second. Almost every other deck above it is going to have a significantly better time. You know? At least, I should say, if it goes second, every other deck is going to be able to beat it above it. And if it goes first, a lot of the other decks can also beat it as well. But it does have some good stuff. It is a bit susceptible to hand traps like Dimension Shifter and like Maxi and stuff. And it doesn't really have the ability to play non-engine, to break boards, nor to really help counter Maxi and the like. I don't know. Phantom Knights are fine. They do stuff occasionally. Plunder, I want to put in Rogue just because I feel like right now... yeah, I don't know. Plunder's in a weird spot. It always is, but all in all, I still think Plunder is pretty good, just as a deck in general. It has some weird ways of interacting with you, and while it does technically die to Ash Blossom, it's still okay. I don't know. I feel like it's also very, very underrated. And I feel like every time I see it, it's actually just popping off and is really strong. It can also make really big monsters, which does matter. Punk is actually pretty good. I'm going to put Punk up here. It's mostly Punk Kashtira that makes it pretty strong. But being able to actually access bounce effects is pretty strong, just in general. And then also being able to go first in and like set up a way to see like hand traps and stuff like that, as well as having one card combos and the like is also nice. Rescue Ace is honestly really, really bad right now. If you don't see Hydrant, the deck is bad. And even if you do see Hydrant, it dies to just about everything right now. So I'm going to put it really low. I really don't think that this is very good for climbing. It's just too inconsistent. Runic Stun still exists because guess what? Runic was not the problem with Runic Stun. It was the myriad of other draw cards that got you into the Runic cards, and then those Runic cards having access to things like Card of Demise to auto-win, or even just being able to see one Floodgate, oftentimes won you the game. So, Runic Stun is still Runic Stun and will probably still be able to be played, and is probably better than like most of the decks currently in the game. Runic Sprite, on the other hand, I still think is pretty good. It's probably the better of the Sprite variants. Maybe not better than the Runic for Hire variant, but it's still pretty good. Salamangrates, it didn't really gain anything. In fact, it did get a hit on the ban list, more so than anything, but I still think Salamangrate's pretty good. Scareclaw's nice because it can go second pretty well, utilizing the Kashtira stuff like Fenrir and Unicorn and Scareclaw in order to push for lethal pretty effectively. And I think the biggest issue is Maxi, but what deck doesn't hate Maxi? Sky Striker's just not great right now. I'm going to put it above Plunder. Maybe here. The biggest problem, I think, is targeting. I think targeting right now is in a pretty bad spot. That's kind of weird, but I think having an effect that targets does kind of hurt the decks, and more specifically this deck. So, yeah. But on top of that, I think the deck's just not great. It's kind of underpowered. It can kind of OTK, and it overall wants to go second, but I think right now going second is really, really weak. Unless you're playing, like, an OTK strategy, right? Because a lot of decks can search follow-up, or, like, have follow-up, right? Like, all three of these top decks are really good at turn 3 and onward. Same with even, like, Branded. Kashtira is up there with that. So it's just, like, yeah, if you don't OTK, you're just kind of boned. And your turn 1 is significantly weaker than all the rest of them. Right. Sprite's kind of mid. I'm going to put it like here. It's just not great. Spiral is probably slept on a bit too much. I think Spiral does really well with like Kashtira stuff. Having access to Birth to normal summon the spellcaster that I can't remember its name. But on top of that, just being able to like auto win going first is also very nice. And having so many points of interaction that aren't like pendulums almost does help the deck a bit. It is more inconsistent than the pendulum deck, which is why I put the pendulum magician specifically above it. But overall, I do think that just like it has some killer games going first. And it also doesn't necessarily fold immediately going second, which is different from like this deck. Dragon Link is probably the 4th best deck right now. Again, Bystial's got better because Mathmech got better, right? But on top of that, Dragon Link was arguably already one of the best decks in the format. And yeah, that's basically it. Losing a quick launch and a chaos base, again, or kind of cosmetic hits, it doesn't really matter that much. Because again, most of the Bystial stuff is more impactful, and still having access to 2 apiece of chaos base and quick launch is enough. Swordsoul is pretty mid right now. I'm going to put it above Sprite. Is it better than Sprite? I actually don't think so. I think it's better than Pendulum, but not by much. Yeah. I don't really have anything to say. It hasn't really grown in any meaningful capacity, whereas most of the other decks have gotten better. And more importantly, right now, Protoss Pass, or like Protoss Called Dark, is really bad. And yes, you could argue like, oh, but Swordsoul can have Protoss Call whatever attribute. The problem is, in a best of 1, you're not going to know what your opponent is playing, and so Protoss Called Dark, against a meta where like cyberse has a million different attributes, like Labyrinth doesn't really care because they could just play on a different turn, right? Pearly, okay, you can stop them from making Noir, but they just make Happy anyway. You know, there's a lot of decks where it's like, they don't really care. Like, they kind of do, and it kind of hurts them, but it's not enough to, like, stop them from playing the game. So there's that. And then the rest of the combo just isn't enough anymore. Baron Shishao Pass isn't enough. Even if you get the Blackout, it's still not enough. So there's that. Cyberse, or Synchro Turbo is kind of mid. Tearlament. Tearlament goes above Kashtira. I know. Weird. Hear me out. Tearlament honestly is in a really good spot because it actually utilizes the Kashtira cards better than the Kashtira deck does. And the reason for this is because Tearlament has a lot more of a high roll strategy, and it doesn't immediately lose to a lot of other board breaking options that would also break like Pearly or Mathmech or what have you. It's a very weird spot right now, but I do think that it is very, very strong. This could be my bias towards Tearlament, and it probably is, but I genuinely do believe that right now Tearlament is more flexible and has a better matchup spread against a lot of the other top decks, as well as just isn't weak to a lot of the stuff that is currently seeing play. Like, yes, I say Bestials are getting better, but honestly, it's weird because it's like, yes, Bestials are getting better and Bestials are better, but I think Tier is one of the reasons why Bestials are getting better as well. But like with the lower priority on things like Kashtira, that makes Tearlament get better. I think that the limitations do matter, and I don't think it's like the best. I'm gonna put it in Tier 2. I don't think it's quite up here, but I do think it is better than Kashtira. Rika's whatever. I don't know. Rika's fine. I don't know what you want me to say. Rika shouldn't be all that good because Maxi, but it still is. Like, it still auto wins with its combo sometimes going first. So, you know, draw 2 hand traps. Super Heavy Samurai doesn't have its new support, so it's not all that great. I believe this is Constellar, which is also not all that great. Thunder Dragon's actually pretty decent, mostly because of the Dragon Link stuff. Honestly, I could probably put this higher because of Dragon Link stuff. I'm going to put it in Rogue, though. Tri-Brigade Sprite is probably the... Tri-Brigade Sprite is probably the best version of Sprite at the current moment, and that's because the Tri-Brigade stuff allows Sprite to do a lot more. However, what I will say, there's not another Tri-Brigade list on this thing, on this tier list, which I do need to note, because I honestly think Lyralisk Tri-Brigade, with the unlimit of Cobalt Sparrow, as well as the just matchup spread in general, might be a little bit better for ranked. Hard to say, but I do think that it might be better. It just being able to play like Droplet, being able to play some of the other stuff as well, that's a little bit better, and having access to better end boards, I genuinely think that they're better end boards, is a lot more impactful. So there's that. Live Twin, or more specifically Live Twin Sprite, I think is arguably the second best version of Sprite. You could probably switch these two, but yeah, there you go. I'm gonna move both of the... no, that's fine. Vanquish Soul is tier 2. Vanquish Soul is at the top of tier 2. Maybe you could argue that it's above, like slightly above, like it's here, but I don't think it's that much more powerful. The problem, again, is consistency. If you're able to see the attributes that you need, like, for example, multiple fires and a dark, right? Or, like, specifically, if you're able to see, like, Stake Your Soul and a fire, and then, like, you don't get interrupted, yeah, it's pretty good. But, like, Ash Blossom kills the deck. It's really, really impactful against that deck. Yeah, Imperm can kill you, depending on if you draw your bounce effect or not, right? There's a lot of things where it's like, it's not really up to you, but it also is absolutely up to the Vanquish Soul player kind of thing. So, it's in this weird spot. I think it's good for climbing, but I do think it's kind of inconsistent. So I don't want to put it clear up here, but we'll put it here. Dinosaur is not bad, but not great. Unchained's not great. I know this is like the new Unchained cards, but it's fine. That one's not great. Valence, if it does its combo, auto wins. If it doesn't, is really bad, and can die to almost any hand trap. Virtual World is better than I think a lot of people make it out to be, but even then, it's still not great. Trap Tricks is kind of okay. Zephyr is not great. Again, consistency mostly. And Zombie is not great. I'm wondering if I should move some things. I think we're gonna move some things. I think we're gonna move you and you and you down to Rogue. I think we'll push these guys down. Probably you too. I think we're gonna move Vanquish Soul and Tri-Brigade Sprite and you and you and you. That seems too much. I'll put you there. Yeah. This is a weird list. kind of different from what I normally do. But I think the power level just kind of got more squished. I think the top decks, which were only kind of the top decks, got moved down a bit. And that was it. That's all that really happened. So the format just kind of squished. That's all that basically happened. The top decks are still the best decks, but they're now more likely to brick, or more likely to have like interruptions do something against them. And so because of that, like, the rest of the decks got slightly better, right? But yeah, that's kind of it. Not really anything. Not much has changed, I should say. So that's it for this list. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy. If you did, a like is very much appreciated. And if you disagree, or if you agree with me, you can leave a comment down below telling me how wrong I am, or how correct I am. And yeah, that's going to be it. Thank you guys so much for watching. And remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.